Coming up on the Together for Good podcast, this is not a Christmas story. Here we go.
Welcome to the Together for Good podcast, a podcast created by Bethany Lutheran Church in Cherry Hills Village, Colorado, and hosted by me, Pastor Nate Preisinger. On Together for Good, our goal is to provide practical, engaging content that supports you without expectations. Whether you're feeling disconnected from traditional religion or simply exploring what faith means in your life, we're here to walk alongside you. No matter where you are on your journey of faith, we're glad you're here. Welcome to Together for Good.
When I graduated from college, I moved to Buffalo, New York in order to begin a ministry for young adults who lived in that city. And what was really fun about this was getting to do a ton of work with other people my age who are interested in the faith questions and wanting to gather together in community to talk about matters of faith. But what was really difficult about leading a community for young adults is that we all lived in apartments and none of us had a lot of money. And I didn't have a specific church building where I could direct everyone to. So this ministry often happened in bars and in restaurants and at parks. And that was fun and that was good. But again, we didn't have a lot of money, so we didn't want to be going out to dinner all the time or spending too much money on drinks together all the time. And some of the conversations that we were having needed to happen in a more private setting. Not only that, but if we wanted to do any type of prayer or worship gathering together, it felt really difficult to be able to do that in a public space like a coffee shop or a bar. And so one of the things I did early on was go looking for other spaces that might work for this young adult ministry. One day, as I was driving through the city, this question constantly on my mind, I took a wrong turn and accidentally ended up in a neighborhood where there was a huge, beautiful Lutheran church right in the middle of this neighborhood in North Buffalo. I had no idea that this Lutheran church existed. I had no idea that this is where it was located. And so I walked up to the door to see if I could get in to talk with someone. This was during the day, so I figured there might be a secretary in or maybe one of the pastors nearby. And so I try to open the church door. It's locked. But I notice a little sign that says, call the church office during these office hours to be let in. So I call and I explain myself to the church secretary. I explain that I'm a Lutheran minister in training at that point in time, and that I'm leading a young adult group, and I'd love to just come in and look around in the building to see if there might be a space that could work for our gathering. Well, the secretary informs me, no, you need to come back when one of the pastors is here. I'm like, no, it's not. I just need to look around, right? Like, this might not even be a good fit. Can I please just come in? No, you may not. Please come back when the pastors are in. Like, okay, when will the pastors be back? I don't know, the secretary says. And so I left. And I crossed that entire idea off my list because clearly hospitality was not a strong suit, at least of that secretary or that church. A few weeks later, I was at a collection, a gathering of Lutheran colleagues, and there was a Lutheran pastor there who I knew, and I had no idea that he was one of the people helping out at this particular Lutheran church. He was mainly at another Lutheran church, but they were helping and assisting with pastoral leadership because this church, Parkside, that I had driven by, was without a pastor at the moment. And so I told him my funny story about the secretary, and he sighed very deeply and said, we are going to fix this. And sure enough, after some conversations with the church council there, it was agreed that I could host my young adult group in one of their rooms on one night a week. It's an incredible space for us. We loved being able to meet there. It was such a central location, such an intimate and personal and private space that we could use for our conversations, our worship services, and our gatherings. And then, about a year after all of this, the synod and my candidacy committee got this idea that that church, Parkside, needed some pastoral leadership. And I, while I was leading this young adult group, also needed a particular congregation to call me in order for me to be ordained as a pastor. It's a lot of bureaucracy. Don't worry about it. But the long and short of it is I ended up as the pastor at that church that had initially not allowed me in the doors. What a funny story. of how God works, right? Like what a strange sequence of unlikely events that is just so hilarious to look back at how God was laying these little breadcrumbs and how the journey led along, even when I thought that it was over. I thought that church, I wrote it off when I drove away from there after that first interaction, never realizing that 2 years later, I would be the called pastor of that particular church. There is a story in the Gospel of John about doubting Thomas. But in that particular story, it talks about how the disciples are in one place and the doors are locked. And Jesus comes and stands among them. And the way that the phrasing is particularly written, it's almost as if this idea that Jesus is the God of locked doors, the God who overcomes locked doors. A really good reminder to us that sometimes when things seem like a dead end, years later, we might look back and realize that that was actually just the beginning of God getting to work in a way we couldn't have conceived of. Because again and again throughout the Bible, it seems like when things should be a dead end, that's actually when the power of God starts to work the strongest. And then not only that, but I like to tell this story because I think it's a story of how God works through human inconsistency. Humans mess things up. We get in the way. We put barriers between God's hope and God's plan and God's call for the world and individuals. But that doesn't mean that those are firm, harsh dead ends. God can work even through human inconsistency, and in fact, often does, in spite of it all. And so a good reminder to you today, if you're struggling or finding yourself in a situation where it just seems like everything is coming up empty, keep praying. Keep trusting for the God of locked doors to open a new door for you, to overcome those boundaries and barriers in a way you never could have imagined. I'm Pastor Nate, and this was not a Christmas story. Stay in peace, everyone.